Hello everybody, I'm Alyssa from Meditative Astrology. Today we're going to walk through the astrology of August 16th through 22nd. We have a couple weeks that are between that solar and lunar eclipse here that we're going to explore. Before we get into that, if you haven't already, go ahead and take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel, so that way you don't miss anything that we have going on here. These weekly videos, they come out every Saturday morning, so you can have them ahead of the upcoming week. And then on Sunday nights, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, we have a live astrologically guided meditation, which is streamed right here to YouTube. It's also streamed to Facebook. So join us for those things. If you go over to social media, Facebook, Instagram, that's where you'll find miscellaneous posts, announcements, and other information that's shared. Every Friday, there's a weekly intention that relates directly to the upcoming meditation. Really, my goal is to give you a process Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of leaning into the energies of the upcoming week. When we come to the meditative space on Sunday, the goal is to take all of your contemplations, everything that you have walked through the upcoming week, and then bring it down to that quiet contemplative space. Bring it to that space where you can cultivate personal conversations with the astrology, with your higher self, with the universe, and really create and cultivate personal relationships with the astrology, bringing it down to that personal, meaningful level and relating it directly to your life and conversing with it. It's no different than talking to another person. The more often you talk to somebody, the more you get to know them, you start to know their style, you start to understand what they're thinking, you just get to know their personality a little bit better, and the relationship builds, right? It's the same thing with astrology. It's the same thing with the universe. The more that we talk to the universe, the more the universe is going to talk back to us. So let's connect on all of the things and walk this astrological journey together, shall we? Let's go ahead and get right into this week here. We start out on Sunday with the moon in the sign of Libra, but we don't have any exact aspects that are perfecting. We are going to talk about Mars and Neptune coming together Monday morning. Their exact perfection of their square comes through at like 5 a.m. Eastern time. So we can see this one building through the weekend and into Monday, but really we're going to move into Monday, August 17th, where we start out with the moon in the sign of Libra before it ingresses into the sign of Scorpio just before 6 p.m. Eastern time. And then we have a few aspects that are going on here this day as well. I'm going to go ahead and put the chart up so that way you all can visualize these aspects here. So first, you will notice that Mars at 3 degrees of Cancer in this chart in the first house is making a square to Neptune in the 10th house in the sign of Aries. We have Mercury in the sign of Leo, which is trining Saturn in the sign of Aries. So that is a fire trine that we have. You can see Mercury in the second house in this chart here. Sitting between Jupiter and the sun there. And then we also have a nice little sextile that is coming through here this day between Venus and Jupiter. Now, these aspects are gonna all be building through the weekend, but they do perfect early on in the week here. So let's talk about these three aspects that we have. Let's start with Mars and Neptune coming through. I have that it comes through at 5:38 Eastern time, always Eastern time zone. You can translate to your own time zone. And they come together at 3 degrees and 59 minutes. So they connect just as Neptune is moving from that 4th degree into the 3rd degree. So really right in that space, you can have a very tight conjunction. Remember that Neptune is retrograde in the sign of Aries at the moment here. When I think about Mars and Neptune coming together in any sort of form, I think about inspired action. I think about what motivates us and what lifts us up from inside. When we're talking about these two planets across in these signs specifically, so Neptune is in the sign of Aries, which is a fire sign. Mars is in the sign of Cancer, which is a water sign. I think about the emotional driving force and the passions that are behind our motivations and our actions. Remember that Mars is one of the driving forces in the chart. It's our action, it's our motivation, it's the movements, it's what makes us go forward, right? It's what propels us, what has us moving. What are our motivations? What are our ambitions? Those are the type of things that Mars is concerned with. In the sign of Cancer, Mars is very concerned about acting from a place of emotional security and finding emotional stability in a place where it can feel a little erratic. It can feel like there isn't emotional stability, right? It can feel like our emotions and our mind is all over the place. But when we're trying to center that in some sort of way. When Mars comes into contact with Neptune, it's coming into contact with that divine unity principle. And it's whether we are deeply connecting to something or deeply disconnecting to something with the sign of Neptune, or with the planet Neptune. I think about fighting on half of our beliefs when these two planets come together. I think about protection, protection of ourselves as well as protection of others, those that might feel vulnerable or feel like they are at risk in some sort of way or need somebody to advocate for them. I think about fighting for our own autonomy, yet wanting to connect to somebody. So it's like allowing each individual person to be able to stand up to reach their highest potential and really kind of fighting and protecting for that. But that ends up being a group thing when you're fighting for everybody to be able to be their own self, right? Be their own authentic, emotionally authentic self. I say authentic because Neptune is in the sign of Aries, which is a fire sign. There's huge creative potential here. These are both cardinal signs. They both like to start and initiate, but they just like to do so in different elemental ways. But this is a square. So it's not necessarily that these two things can come together as cohesively as they would in the trine or, you know, the conjunction, things like that. So with the square, there's some sort of tension, there's some sort of discomfort, there's a place that feels like this isn't working for us and we need to be able to move forward, or there's some sort of challenge or some sort of obstacle for us to come through for. And you know, there is often a lesson for us to learn in the squares, right? We learn from the hard things. We don't always learn from the easy things. So where do you feel inspired to act? Where do you feel inspired to go forward? Does it feel like there's a challenge? Does it feel like there's a roadblock in some sort of way? This may give us the motivation to work through those challenges. I'm inspired by something so deeply that I feel like I need to go down this path, even though I don't know exactly where that path is going to take me. When you think about Mars and Neptune and that inspired action, it can have you just trusting the flow, right? I feel like I need to go this. I feel this within my heart. I feel this within my bones. I just know this is the direction to go, but I don't necessarily know what the full path is in front of me. There's that belief or that faith or that inner knowing when you are connecting to Neptune. So it may be, I know there's a challenge that's going to be here, but I'm moving forward anyways. I'm moving forward with this creative drive that I have. I'm moving forward with this emotional inspiration that I have coming from within me. I also think about connecting to otherworldly spaces. You don't necessarily think about that with Mars within its own right, but Neptune removes reality. It moves us closer to something that's a little bit more subtle, and water connects us, right? Water connects us to life. And Cancer, the place where Mars is a water sign. Cancer is the temple of the moon, the place of water, brings us together through different connections. It's the connections the things that bring us all together. Think about how different bodies of water on land have historically connected different groups. So, you know, before like modern transit, waterways were used a lot, right? So if you had different settlements that were at different ends of waterways, or, you know, you have different pathways that connect different groups of land or whatnot, that is how people got around for like distance travel, or one of the ways is they would travel by water. So think about the connections that water has. Water is also always shifting and always changing. Think about, you know, kind of like the phrase, like you never step in the same river twice. It's something that feels, when we're talking about the water element, it's something that feels tangible, but yet not tangible at the same time. So some of the different connections that it brings us to is our ancestral connections, our memory body, our dreams, the feminine goddess or motherly guidance. Many of us feel some sort of connection when we gaze at the moon, right? It feels like we're connected to something a little bit deeper, something a little bit bigger than ourselves, even if it's a little bit illusory and not able to necessarily grasp it super easy. So together, when we think about Neptune interacting with Mars that's in a water sign, it feels like we could be connecting to some other dimensional type spaces, whether that's reaching into our ancestral line, whether that's reaching into our memory body, whether there's dream interpretation that is involved here. I think a lot about signs and symbols and omens with Neptune, and Mars may be having us wanting to explore those with a little bit more curiosity or a little bit more wonder, right? I think about things coming together that can feel subtly or profoundly divine when these two planets come together in this combination here. And it could be, it could be a crisis of faith. It could be a struggle of faith. It could be, I'm not quite sure about my beliefs anymore at this moment, or if they're going to carry me through. Or it could be, I know I can get through this challenge because of my beliefs, because of my faith, because of the belief track that I have within me. It can be very otherworldly, and it can also be very spiritual. It can also feel very spiritual if that is within your wheelhouse. Maybe there's a call, maybe there's a longing. I think a lot about longing and wishful thinking and wishfulness with Cancer and with Neptune both. When we talk about the memory body, when we talk about ancestry, when we talk about, the womb space and that motherly guidance or grandmotherly guidance that you can get in the sign of Cancer, there's a longing, there's a wishfulness, right? There's a want. Sometimes there's when we recollect and we remember things. Remembering things is a very Cancerian word. When we remember things that we are fond of, there's almost like a longing to be back into that space. When we're talking about the realm of water here, I think a lot about, especially in the sign of Cancer, I think about that amniotic fluid that, babies are held in when they are within their mother's womb. And this is not the case for all mothers, of course, but everybody has a very different pregnancy, and I can speak to that as, having a couple children myself. But there's a lot of people. There's a lot of mothers that once they have their baby, they really kind of miss that feeling of, on some level, of having that baby with them all the time, or holding that baby within them, or the connection, just that there's a special connection that can be made between a mother and a baby in a womb. And then afterwards, there can, in some cases, be almost a longing or a wishfulness to kind of be back into that space again. We talk about baby fever. If somebody has children and then they hold a little baby, you kind of get that, those fuzzy feelings for kind of wanting that again. That kind of longing and wishfulness could be coming up in some level here. So Mars and Neptune coming into the square here at the beginning of the week. I should talk about some of the shadow type things that we could also see here, because it is a square. So we've talked about challenges, we've talked about crisis of faith, we've talked about overcoming things here, right? With Neptune, there can definitely be some confusion, so things can not quite be as they appear. With Mars and Neptune, especially with Mars being in the place of Cancer, the place of Moon, which is emotions and relates to the body, we can think about low energy, we can think about low vitality, we can think about putting in efforts that feel like they're not quite showing results. Think about how Neptune dissolves things away. So we would do best to have discernment to be sure that any actions that we are taking are not reactionary. Again, we are talking about water and fire. So we're talking about passion and fast driving motions, and then emotions and our reactions, and the both conscious and subconscious conditionings that can be within our body, whether we are aware of them or not. So some of these things can come up here for us as well. So we also mentioned that Mercury is making a trine to Saturn here. This is a fire trine. Fire is very creative, very passionate, very inspiring, very authentic. It wants to be its own, right? It's very determined and very focused. So when these two planets are coming together here in the trine, this is one of the most beneficial forms of of an interaction with Saturn that you can have. We can be creating long-lasting structures and foundations that stand the test of time. It can be very much like, I'm getting the work done that I need to get done because I need to get it done. right? Just because this is the way that we are going. When I think about when I think about Mercury and Saturn coming together in a fire trine, so we're talking about the fire element here, I think about almost like an incinerator, okay? So Saturn is the principle of no's, right? Foundations, boundaries, limits. Where has something reached its expiration date? We talk about Saturn being the lord of death and decay and things falling away and father time. So if there's things that are standing in our way, things that have completed their life cycle, these two planets can fairly quickly toss those things aside. And I think about like an incinerator. I think about taking something that we feel like we don't need or want and tossing it in a fire, and it's gone in a flash. So again, this is another one of those that, especially with these happening kind of simultaneously, if we're removing, if we're cleansing, if we're getting rid of things, let's just be sure that the things that we are getting rid of are the things that we really want to go away, right? So that's just something for us to keep in mind. But really, this is a very constructive and very creative, like pattern and habit and routine creating aspect that we have coming through here. At the same time, we have this nice little sextile between Venus and Jupiter coming through, which is very cohesive and harmonizing energy. Activities that may be coming through here may have a very subtle flow to them. And this is beneficial to whatever is trying to surface right now. Even if there's challenges, even if there's difficulties, maybe there's an underlying understanding or cooperation that we can see coming through here in some sort of way. When you have the benefic planets coming through, we have Venus in Libra, which is in her home sign. We have Jupiter in the sign of Leo, which is having a ton of action going on here. We just had that solar eclipse in the sign of Leo. So Leo is trying to create, Leo is trying to start, right? And Jupiter is in the superior position here. So Jupiter in the sign of Leo may be saying, we're leading from the heart. We're taking the heart-centered lessons that we've learned, because a lot of us have had lessons in listening to our heart and being authentic and expressing ourselves in a healthy way, learning to lean into our healthy level of ego, right? Like, we have to be able to stand high and tall, but we're not stepping on other people. We're not allowing our light to outshine others, but everybody's light needs to be able to shine, right? There's a lot of ongoing lessons that are starting and initiating around those themes, around Leo themes for a lot of people. So it's listening to our heart, listening to what's inside here. So this Jupiter speaking to Venus, who's in the sign of Libra, may say, yes, let's take these heart-centered actions and let's bring some sort of balance. Let's bring some sort of harmony. Libra has a lot of social calculus that's going on. There's a lot of social awareness. So let's spread the love. Let's spread the wealth here at the same time, right? If there's structures and foundations that we have going together, let's share it with people. Let's share it with others. Let's let others experience it. If we're inspired by Mars and Neptune, let's let other people hear that. Let's let other people feel that. If there's something that needs to fall away here at this time with these aspects to be able to move forward, remember that this south node solar eclipse that we just had is on the south node. So it's something releasing as well as something starting at the same time. It's almost like this is kind of speaking to that, where it's like we're creating new things, but there's probably something that's going to need to be able to be let go, and it's going to have a balancing or a leveling effect in some sort of way, or at least that is the hope for us here, right? So there we are on Monday. And then for the next few days, we're going to roll through following the moon around here. Tuesday, we're going to have the moon in the sign of Scorpio all day. It's going to square Pluto. It's going to square Jupiter. That Scorpio moon will take us right into Wednesday, August 19th. And then the moon will move into the sign of Sagittarius early in the morning around 4:30 a.m. Eastern time. And then if we move forward into Friday, that Sagittarius moon will take us through the whole day. And here we have Venus moving into an opposition with Saturn. So Venus in the sign of Libra is opposing Saturn in the sign of Aries. On its best level, Venus and Saturn brings maturity. It brings the next level of commitment, right? It brings us saying, I'm committing to this thing that I enjoy fully. Venus represents love, relationships, beauty, harmony, aesthetics, and just the overall principle of joy, pleasure. What brings us joy? What fills our cup, right? What makes us feel good? What are the things that we like to enjoy, right? Many of us, the relationships that we have and the relations are things that we like to enjoy. And again, Venus is in Libra, so there's a lot of balancing, there's a lot of harmonizing and wanting to cohesively bring different things together. It may be bringing different people or different groups together or different relations, or, you know, even just different aspects within our own head, right? Wanting to bring those things together. So the opposition can be like a tug and a pull. It can be like a secret conjunction where these two planets that are in opposition have more in common than what they realize they have. So when these two sit down and they start having heart-to-heart conversations, maybe they realize, oh, we are taking this to the next level. Venus Saturn could be somebody, you know, somebody coming to the next level and moving from being in a dating relationship to moving towards marriage. Or it could be going from, you know, dating and having separate homes to moving in together in some sort of way. On the other level, there's a tug and a pull between the opposition, right? They pull together, but they also push apart. It's almost like magnets, where you can put, if you turn them one way, they're going to come together. But then if you turn one and just flip one little thing, they're going to push apart. Just that one little shift, that one little turn takes it from maturity and next level commitment to restrictions, to releases from confinements and hard, sobering conversations that where, you know, on one level could be bringing us to the next level commitment. We're moving in together. Or it can be releasing us from things that confine us. I'm moving out and getting my own place. This is no longer working for me. I need to find my own independence. These two planets coming into the opposition from Aries and Libra feels like there's a lot about the balancing level of give and take between my own autonomy and my relations, and where the level of effort is given. Is there give and take? Is it level? Is it balanced? You know, no relationship is 50-50 all the time. You know, they're 50-50 as often as possible. Sometimes it's 20-80, sometimes it's 30-70. And, you know, are we closer to the 50-50 more often than we are to the 20-80? Right? Like, nothing is perfect. Things are always being worked on in probably every relationship, whether that is romantic or otherwise, because in the sign of Libra, it can be all of the different relationships that we have within our lives. And it's worth noting that Saturn is in its fall and Venus is in its domicile, which is Saturn's exaltation. Saturn is exalted in the sign of Libra. So fairness and balance may be prioritized here. The leveling of the field and honesty is necessary. You know, if there's been deceit, it may come out here, right? It's that type of thing. So with Venus being Venus-Saturn transits can be hard. They can be difficult. They can be very sobering. They can feel isolating. They can feel like we're just not quite satisfied. But in this opposition, Venus feels like she has a little bit more say-so because she's speaking her own language, and in a way she's speaking a little bit of Saturn's language here too. So if Saturn in the sign of Aries feels like it wants to, you know, release from confinements to be able to have more autonomy in some sort of way, Venus may have a little bit of communicative tact to be able to talk a little sense into Saturn here. Hopefully, potentially, right? She may be able to, on the other hand, speak up for what she wants and what she needs within her own right. And Venus may be saying, I'm no longer happy. I am not okay with the space that I am in here right now, today. But it's a space to be able to grow from. So whether that's growing, you know, individually or growing collectively or in some sort of partnership. Venus-Saturn is not all about relationships, but there is a big relational component because of Venus, because of the sign of Libra. So taking things to the next level, restrictions, releasing from confinements, it does not have to be within a relationship. Not every single person is in a relationship or even wants to be in one. So it can be within other systems and structures and frameworks within our lives. Where are we ready to take something to the next level? Where are we ready to commit to some sort of process or some sort of project? So this is where we are finding ourselves at the end of the week. That Sagittarius moon will take us right into Saturday. The moon will move into the sign of Capricorn around 5 p.m. Eastern time, and that will take us into the next week with Sunday, August 23rd. That's the day that Venus is going to move into the sign of Virgo, and we will talk about that on next week's video. So we have a few different aspects. We're in that space in between the eclipses. We're going from the solar eclipse, which is the new moon, moving towards the full moon. So we're moving through that first quarter moon phase. So the moon's light is building here. There's something that is going from the seeding moment to really trying to establish itself in some sort of way. And it feels like the aspects that we have this week speak to that lunar phase that we are in. Because if you think about that kind of first quarter lunar phase and, you know, the illumination percentages that surround that, there's a lot about needing to be able to overcome challenges and overcome difficulties to be able to survive, to get to the place where you can really feel like you're growing. Think about when you start to initiate something. There's a lot of work that usually needs to go in at the beginning, and if you put in the work and the effort for the organization and, you know, taking all the steps that you should be taking, usually down the road, things start to flow, things start to get a little bit easier. Think about planting a seed, right? Think about growing a plant. You plant that seed at the new moon. The first quarter moon phase is when the seedling pops up out of the ground and you can finally see that there's something that is growing there. You might not know exactly what it is yet, and it needs a lot of protection from the elements. It needs just the right of sunlight, it needs the just right amount of water, and if it doesn't have what it needs, it's going to die off awfully quickly. Bigger, more mature plants can handle a little harsher conditions because they're a little hardier, they're a little bigger, they're a little stronger, right? So that first quarter moon phase is about overcoming challenges and individuating to come into some sort of process. The aspects that we have this week feel like we're able to come to a new level, to that seedling going from a seed to something that we can start to see flourishing. But there's a lot of effort. There may be some overcoming, there may be some challenges or some obstacles that we need to come through. So this feels like one of those weeks where the work can be rewarded. The work, the discernment, the awareness can be rewarded here. Commitment, staying power, and sticking with things feels like there may be some benefit that can come from that here this week with these aspects that we have going on. So I hope everybody has a wonderful, productive week. I hope that this video has served you well, and I hope that it finds you in a good space. Sending lots of love, sending lots of light to everybody, and thank you for taking the time to walk through the week astrologically with me. Sunday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Join us here for a live meditation, and then I will see you back here next week for next week's video. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.